Well, good morning, church. It's good to see all your smiling faces. It's been a while since I've been up front here preaching, so I don't really want you all to look at me like this. So I want you to look at your hands. Please look at your hands. Don't look at me, look at your hands. I'm serious. Jackie, look at your hands. The beard's gone, I know. Look at my hands. Turn your hands over. Look on the other side. I think your hands have a story to tell. What do you think? Move your fingers. Move your fingers. You know how amazing our hands were created. Hands are amazing. How much do you know about your hands? How it functions and all that? Do you know your hands? I want you to shake the hand of the person next to you and say Happy Sabbath to them. Shake their hand. How was that handshake? Was it nice and firm or was it quite sort of weak? Did it feel like a dead fish handshake? They say you can tell a lot about a person by that first handshake. You know, my hands used to be really warm when I was younger. And about 12 years ago, I had a spinal injury and my hands and my feet went cold. Just like that. So if you shake my hand and it's cold, I'm not half dead, I'm just sort of have a spinal injury. How many bones do you have in your hand? Who can tell me? How many bones in your hand? You know, it's really good for us to know a bit more about ourselves, how we function, how we work. So if you give me one answer, you could be right, you could be wrong, because not everybody have the same amount of bones in their hand. Did you know that? But we have around 27 to 29 bones in our hands. How many muscles do you have in your hand? No one want to guess? How many muscles in your hand? 10? Okay. Well, that's a bit of a trick question. You have 17 muscles in the palm of your hand. And then how many muscles do you think you have in your fingers? Elizabeth, how many muscles in your fingers? Elaine, how many muscles in your fingers? Oh my goodness. Well, the answer is 0. There's no muscles in your fingers. You have 17 muscles in your palm and 18 muscles in your forearm that moves your fingers. So, you know, the bones in your fingers are connected through to the muscles in your palms and the muscles in your forearms. Isn't that interesting? Would you like to know a few more facts? So, how many ligaments do you think you have in your hand? 123 or thereabout. That's a lot of ligaments because there's so many different movements and functions and things. God made your hands amazing. How many nerves do you think you have in your hand? So many questions today. I love asking questions. I can't give all the answers, but I love to ask questions. So you have 48 nerves in your hand. 48. And then you have all the little receptors in the front of your fingers and in your hand. A lot of little receptors that makes your hand so sensitive that you can actually touch and feel little defects in the wood. And that is why we can touch things and we can actually teach our fingers to read Braille because there's so many receptors on your fingers. How are the kids getting on there? Just remember, you have how many fingers in each hand? 5. Yes, that's right. You don't have to make the nerves in your fingers, so just make your hand. Just sort of the outside view of your hand. Now you have 30 different arteries in your hand, 30 different arteries. And you have very interesting, your ring finger have artery that directly lines up with the heart. Now I'm not sure exactly what they mean by that, but there's a direct line between the artery in your ring finger to your heart. And they call it the artery of love because it points straight at your heart, and that's why people wear their ring on the ring finger, because of that. Now, what do you think the average grip strength is of an adult male? So if you grab onto something, so if you take a scale, we used to do it when we were young. You take a scale and you push it like that, and then you have to divide it by 2 to get your grip strength in one hand. So what do you think an average male grip strength would be? Any guesses? About 50 kilograms. Which is not that not that much, because if you think about it, if you go and do rock climbing and you have to hang by a rock with one hand, you know, that would be, you have to support your whole body weight on that one hand. So some people have extremely strong hands and very strong grip strength. So 50 kilograms, and for a adult lady, 25. So men, when you shake a lady's hand, be gentle and kind. Don't try and be a macho and squeeze their hand. It's not nice. They only have half the grip strength, and we have to respect them. Now, the motor cortex of the brain is the part of your brain that's responsible for all the movement in your body. You know, your legs moving and your arms moving and everything else. Now, 25% of the motor cortex is responsible for hand movement. 25% just goes to your hand movement, because your hands play such an important role. Wow, there's some good hands coming on there. That's really good. Just add another finger on there, I think. Your hands were made amazing by God. Really, I mean, move your fingers again. Move it. I know someone that once tried to make a hand, and it was the beginning stages of the process. But it's really difficult to make one finger to move properly. Really difficult. Your thumb would be one of the most important fingers. Yeah, that's right. Now I want to tell you a story. It's a story about Albrecht and Albert. They were two brothers that lived in the 16th century, and they were two of 18 siblings, a big family. The father was a goldsmith, and he used to work 18 hours a day to support his family. There were no extra money for nothing. They only just came by with what they had. And the two sons, Albrecht and Albert, they had a real passion for art, and they were really good. They could sit there and sketch something up, and it was just a beautiful sketch. And they were thinking to themselves, how will we ever develop this gift that we have if we don't have a cent to go and study somewhere? We don't have money to go to university. So it so happened that after many years of talking it over between the two of them, they decided one day, what they will do is, they're going to toss a coin. And if it falls on their heads, then one of them will go into the mines and work to earn money to pay for the other one to go and study. And they flicked the coin, and it fell, and Albrecht were given the opportunity to go to university, to do a 4-year degree in art. He was really good, and soon he was better than his tutors at sketching, at carving wood, at making sculptures. He had a real gift. So Albrecht, just before he graduated, he was starting to earn real good money just with his art, because he was so good. And it came to the day of graduation. He graduated and he did really well. And he headed back home again. For the first time, he didn't have money to travel backwards and forwards to see his family. And the family was absolutely ecstatic that their son managed to get a degree in art, and he did so well. And they had a big table set up. And Albrecht was seated on the one side and Albert on the other side of the table. And Albrecht stood up and he said, "I want to propose a toast on my brother. He's worked for 4 years really hard to support me while I did my degree at university. And I want to propose this toast to him. And I want to tell him, Albert, it's now your turn. It's your turn. I've been starting to earn real good money. You can go to any university you want and I'll pay for it all." And Albert was sitting there with his head bowed and there was tears running down his cheeks. And he said, "Brother, it's too late. 4 years of working in the mine has ruined my hands. Every bone, or at least in every finger, a bone has been crushed over the last 4 years. And my hands cannot even hold this glass properly while you propose the toast, because arthritis is starting to set in. It's too late." This story really moved his brother. And he painted 2 hands, the praying hands, that is now very well known. It's all well known around the world. It's 450 years ago. But these hands are the hands of his brother that worked so hard to see him through university. So how are we getting on, kids? Well, it's not that hard to make hands, is it?
I just broke mine.
Oh, you can try again. You can try again. As long as you don't distract the attention from the adults, that's all good. I want you to imagine Jesus when he was making Adam, when he formed the hands. Kids, can you see this little picture up here? It's a bit pixelated, but can you see there's a clay image lying there? And that's Jesus that's stooping down and he's creating Adam, and he's making his face. And then he's going to go down and make his hands. Can you imagine when he blew the breath of life into his nostrils and his fingers started to move? He became a living soul. Isn't that amazing? Did you bring your Bibles with you this morning? Let's turn to Genesis 2, verse 7. And if you're there, please read it for us. Genesis 2, verse 7.
The Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground, and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul.
That's right. And in those hands that God created were the DNA to live forever. So Adam was designed to live forever. He wasn't designed to die 1,000 years later. Now, how old is your hands before they're too old to do stuff? How old is too old? What is the time to retire from using your hands? Do you think God, when you get to the age of 85, 90, 100, he says, okay, you can now sit dead still and just put your hands down on the table and don't do anything because your hands are too old. I can't use them anymore. No, not at all. Kids, how old was Noah when he built the ark with his hands? How old was he? Do you think he would have been quite young, because you have to work really hard to chop all the timber, to nail nails in? And yes, he had a lot of help, I know, but he still had to work really hard. Adults, how old was he? He was 500 years old, and he was building the ark. Isn't that amazing? Your hands are never too old for God to use. He can use old hands, and he can use young hands to do his will. What do you think of when I do this?
You're going to kill someone.
Oh. Who do you think? It's a Bible character. Who do you think it is? No? Okay, let's give the adults a turn. Who are you thinking of when I'm standing like this? I heard someone saying it. Abraham. Yes, that's right. Abraham. In obedience to God, Abraham lifted up his hands, ready to do God's bidding. It was just a test though, and God didn't want him to kill his son. Let's go to Genesis 23, and we'll read verse 11 and 12. Genesis 22, verse 11 and 12. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And he said, Lay not thy hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. What an amazing act of obedience. So, what do you think of when I put this over my arm like that? What do you think of? Yes, that's right. Jacob and Esau. I want us to go to the account of Jacob and Esau. We'll go to Genesis 25 and we'll read verse 24 and 24 to 26. Genesis 25, 24 to 26. Okay, if you're there, let's read it. And when a day to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in a womb. And the first came out red, all over like the hairy garment. And they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. And his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 80 years old when he bare them. So we'll continue on by reading Genesis 27, 21 to 23. And I would like to call this the deception of the hands, because it was truly a deception of hands. Genesis 27, 21 to 23. Okay, and Isaac said unto Jacob, Come near, I pray thee, that I may feel thee, my son, whether thou be my very son Esau or not. And Jacob went near unto Isaac, his father, and he felt him and said, The voice is Jacob's voice, but the hands are the hands of Esau. And he discerned him not, because his hands were hairy as his brothers. So Esau blessed him because he thought it was Esau. That was truly the deception of the hands, wasn't it? You remember that song that says, Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do? Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. There's a Father up above, and He's looking down in love. Oh, be careful, little hands, what you do. So what do you think of when you see this coat? Joseph, that's right. Is this the coat of many colors, do you think? Not too many, just a few. You know, Joseph really loved the coat that his dad got him made. He really, really loved this coat. And he thought to himself, I bet you he thought to himself, I want to wear this coat forever. I don't want to lose this coat. This coat is really, really special to me. I want to call Joseph the man with the blessed hands. And you'll soon see why. Yes, Joseph was his father's favorite. Yes, he was a talebearer. And yes, he had some dreams that got him into a lot of trouble because it really got his brothers jealous. And worst of all, he voiced those dreams to his brothers and to his father, and he probably shouldn't have done that because they got so jealous. They hated him for it. I want us to go to Genesis 37 verse 18. Please go to Genesis 37, 18. And we'll read down to about 22. This is when his dad told him, said, Joseph, you go and see what your brothers are up to, make sure they're doing their job well, and then you come back and give me a report, would you? So off he went, and he found his brothers. And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. And they said one to another, Behold, this dreamer cometh. Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, Some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And verse 21, And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hand, and said, Let us not kill him. And Reuben said unto them, Shed no blood, but cast him into a pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hands on him. And he was thinking, that he would deliver him, so that he might rid him out of their hands, and deliver him to his father again. So they did listen to Reuben, and they cast him into a pit. But soon they heard some Ishmaelite traders come by. And what did they do? Without Reuben knowing, they sold him to the traders. Let's go to Genesis 39 verse 1. Genesis 39 verse 1. Kids, did he take this coat with him to Egypt? No. Okay, I better take it off then.
The brothers put blood on it.
Yes,
And they were really fun.
that's right. And they took it to the dad, and he was so sad. He cried for days and days and days. He was very sad because he thought his son was dead, didn't he? And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him off the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hands. Can you see why I said he was a man with blessed hands? The Lord made everything that he did to prosper at his hand. Verse 4. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and all that he had, to put into his hands. He saw that God blessed his hands, and he put everything that he owned in his hands. So let's have a look. We'll go to verse 6. And he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught to had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favoured. Now, unfortunately, we know that Mrs. Potiphar really liked Joseph, and that she tempted him. And we can see in verse 12. And she caught him by his garment, saying, R18, and he left his garment in her hand and fled and got out. For the second time, his garment was rented from him and were left in someone else's hands. The first time his garment was rented from him, he was thrown into a pit and sold as a slave. The second time, when his garment was rented from him, what happened to him? He was thrown into prison. You know what someone once said? To succeed in the eyes of man, but to fail in the eyes of God is the ultimate failure. Did you get that? I'll repeat that. To succeed in the eyes of man, but to fail in the eyes of God is the ultimate failure. It is better to fail in a cause that will ultimately succeed than to succeed in a cause that will ultimately fail. You know, Albert Einstein was once talking to a group of very motivated, enthusiastic young men. And he said, "Gentlemen, try not to become men of success, but rather try to become men of value." You know, if only more men and women can say what Joseph said when he was tempted, how can I do this, commit this great sin against God? How can I commit this great sin against my God? This world would be a better place, wouldn't it? Was God with Joseph in jail? Oh, yes, he was. Let's go to Genesis 39 now. Genesis 39, verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. You see how God blessed his hands? Even the prison guard committed all the prisoners into his hand. Isn't that amazing? Forgotten by man, but not forgotten of God. We know that while he was in prison, the chief butler and the baker came to him because they had some dreams and they wanted to know what these dreams meant. And God gave him wisdom to interpret these dreams. Soon both of them were released from prison. The chief butler was restored to his position and the baker unfortunately didn't make it. And 2 years went by. 2 years went by before Pharaoh had the dream, and the chief butler suddenly remembered, oh, but there is a man that can interpret dreams, a man who has the Spirit of God in him to interpret dreams. And he was brought before Pharaoh, and he could interpret the dreams of Pharaoh. And we learn in the Bible how Pharaoh then made him chief over the whole of Egypt. And he took his signet ring off and put it on the hand of Joseph. And he made him second in charge of the kingdom. Those blessed hands received the signet ring of the king. because he served God, and God honored and blessed him for it. What do you think of when you see this staff?
Moses.
Moses. That answer came really quick. I couldn't even ask the adults. You guys were too quick. Yes, the staff of Moses. You know, Moses is such an amazing character in the Bible. It's just incredible. The more you read about him, the more you learn the lesson that God wants to teach each one of us. There are so many amazing lessons to be learned. When all the little boys were getting killed, his life was saved through the mercy and the grace of God. I want to read you a quote, if I can find it. Okay, I'll start over here. The whole future life of Moses, the great mission which he fulfilled as a leader of Israel, testified to the importance of the work of a Christian mother. Did you get that? There is no other work that can equal this. And now this is the crux of the matter. To a very great extent, the mothers hold in their hands the destiny of their children. Is a mother's work important? Oh, yes. To a very great extent, they hold the destiny of their children's future in their hands. Isn't that incredible? Moses' mom managed to spend about 12 years with him and teach him and train him in the fear of the Lord. After that, he spent the next 28 years or so in the courts of Pharaoh, and his hands were taught the skill of warfare, the skill of being a leader. The Pharaoh had in mind to train his adopted son to be the next Pharaoh. He was taught the skills of a Pharaoh. He was taught to be the leader of a great army, to fight and to succeed. He was much loved in Egypt. People really liked him. Unfortunately, when he was about 40 years old, what did he do? He wanted to take matters in his own hands. He didn't want to wait for God's timing. No, he wanted to take the matter into his own hands. And he slayed the Egyptian. God's timing is perfect. We must be careful that we don't take matters in our own hands. We'd rather wait for God's timing. We read in Patriarchs and Prophets, in slaying the Egyptian, Moses had fallen into the same error so often committed by his fathers, of taking into their own hands the work that God has promised to do. Because of this error, he had to flee and spend 40 years in the wilderness. He had to learn the hard lessons of humble humility, faith, patience, and self-sacrifice. And when Moses was ready to be led by God, he called him back to Egypt. And with a mighty hand, God delivered the Israelites from the Egyptians. And with a mighty hand, he led them through the Red Sea with a mighty hand. He fed them in the desert for how many years? For 40 years. Have you ever prepared a meal for 1.5 million people? Your hands will be really tired after that. Imagine feeding 1.5 to 2 million people for 40 years. How many kilograms of food would that take? Wow, that's a lot of food. Did you know that the journey through the desert would have been only about 2 weeks long? would have been a short journey if they were ready to enter into the promised land. Why have Jesus not come yet? Is it because his people are not ready to enter into the promised land? But when the Israelites were ready, he broke down the big, massive walls of Jericho and let them in to the promised land. I want us to just look at a few verses in Psalms about this great deliverance that God has brought upon the Israelites. Let's go to Psalms 44 verse 3. Psalms 44 verse 3. And it reads, "For they got not the land of possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but thy right hand and thine arm and the light of thy countenance, because thou hast a favour unto them." It was God that saved them with his right hand. And because of time, I think I might sum up some of these verses, but they're really good. Psalm 77 verse 20 tells us how God has led the children of Israel like a flock of sheep with his hand. Psalm 63 verse 8 says, "My soul followeth hard after thee, thy right hand uphold me." Do you feel like you want to fall sometimes, that you can't get up? God can uphold you with his right hand. And there's so many beautiful verses in Psalms. Psalms 139 verse 10, it says, even there shall thy hand leadeth me, and thy right hand shall hold me. We better move on. What do you think when you see this, kids? So don't count them, there's one too many. What do you think of? Are you...
Jesus feeding the crowd?
Yes, that's right. Jesus feeding the 5,000. You know, it's really, if you look at the hands of Jesus, what he accomplished, what he did with his hands, it's a wonderful lesson for us. When the man with leprosy came to Jesus, what did he do? Did he keep him at a distance, 10 meters away, and said, "Don't come any closer. I want you to stay right there and give your request. Tell me what you want"? No, what did he do? He actually touched him with his hand. A forbidden thing to do to a leprous man. He touched him with his hand. And he said, "Your request is granted." The man with the withered hand in the temple, what did he do? Restored the man's hand. The lady with the issue of blood, she touched his garment just with her hand and she was healed. The little girl that died, Jesus touched her and he said, "Get up." And she was made whole again, she was alive. The woman that was bowed down like this for 18 years. She couldn't walk straight. She was walking like that. She couldn't even look up. For 18 years, Jesus just touched her and she could stand up straight again. Isn't that amazing? After 18 years to be able to stand up straight again? Is it any wonder that the mothers brought their children to Jesus so he could touch them and bless them and lay his hands on them? Oh, the hands of Jesus. How amazing it would be to shake his hand one day, to see the hand that so loved us that he died for us. You know, if you put a basketball in my hands, it would only be worth about $10. But if you put it in the hands of some of those really skilled basketball players, it can be worth $40 million, that basketball. If you put this in my hand, how much is it worth, Eric? I don't even know.
About $4.
$4. If you put it in the hand of Tiger Woods, maybe $80 million. It depends in whose hands that is. If you put this staff in my hand, I might be able to chase a dog away or maybe push someone aside. But if you put it in the hand of Jesus, through faith, you could part the Red Sea. You see this little stone? If you put it in my hands, I probably wouldn't even be able to throw something at the back of the room and hit it. But what happens when you put it in the hands of King David? Through faith, they could slay a giant with it. If you put the 5 loaves and 2 fishes in my hands, I might be able to feed 1 or 2 adults. But you put it in the hands of Jesus, and he fed more than 5,000 people. It really depends on whose hands it's in. If you give me these 2 nails, I might be able to fix a fence, or maybe, nail 2 boards together for some purpose. If you put these hands in the hands of Jesus, it can lead to salvation. It really depends on whose hands it's in. Your worries and your stress, your anxiety and your problems, if you keep it in your hands, it's always going to stay that. If you take your worries to Jesus, he can take it away and remove it as far as the east is from the west from you. Remember, it depends in whose hands it is. I want to finish with a story of an auctioneer that was standing in front of a hall full of people. It was a good part of town, plenty of money around, but it was a slow day. He auctioned off one thing after the other and got pittance for it. He got very little for it. And then he pulled this box forward and he put it on the table. And as soon as he put it on the table, you just saw all the dust coming off this box. It was full of dust. It has been sitting around for many, many years. He opened the box up, and there was an old violin, really old violin. And he said, "Who will give me $10 for this violin?" And some people just had a little chuckle, and they said, $10 for that violin? Who will give me 5 then? No one said a word. You could hear a pin drop because the auctioneer thought, surely I can get $5. Someone can just use it in an old flower arrangement or something. And then you could hear the steps of an old man walking forward. And he took out his little handkerchief and he dusted off the violin and he put it to his cheek and he tuned it for about 5 seconds and he took out the string, the bow, and he tightened it up and he started to play. And heavenly music came from that violin. It was beautiful. It was amazing. As he was playing, people's eyes started to get bigger. I thought, that sound is absolutely amazing. Beautiful sound came from that old violin that looked like it was worth nothing. When he stopped playing, the first man put up his hand and said, "I'll give you $10,000 for that violin." Can you imagine that? $10,000 for that old violin? Some people's jaws were dropping and they thought, what? Another hand went up. "I'll give you $20,000. It kept going up. The auctioneer couldn't believe his ears. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. But you know what? Someone in the audience knew the value of that violin because a master took it in his hands and were playing. It was a Stradivarius violin. And a few years ago, a Stradivarius violin was sold for $16 million. That violin that no one wanted to give $5 for sold for $2.5 million when the people realized the value of that violin. And it's all because it was put in the hands of a master. I want to invite you today to put your hands in the hands of the master. Unless you put your hands in the hand of the master, your true value will never come to light. You'll just be a number. But the master wants you to become something great. All you have to do is put your hands in the hands of Jesus. Thank you.